Welcome. We are kicking off Space Week New York 2024 with this town hall. This is obviously virtual. We have a lot of other programming and events throughout the week. We'll talk about all of that soon. A lot of exciting things happening virtual and in person. We'll introduce Empire Space, talk about Space Week New York, give some updates from our side on, our organization, but then also sort of the state. Pat will give a tour of our ecosystem via the census, our database of all the stakeholders that exist here. And then we'll talk about preparing for next year, Space Week New York 2025. We have links throughout this presentation, like this one for down here for the town hall discussion. Quadri sent a link in the chat for these, and we'll distribute these slides at the end of the week, and it'll have those active links in there. So this is our list of events so far for this week. We're pretty set on these. There may be another one or two that sneak in here, but this is what the week looks like right now. So obviously we're all here at this Empire Space Virtual Town Hall today, Monday, May 20th. We have a few more events planned for this week. I think 5 more. They're all listed here with the organizations and speakers. Tomorrow, we have one virtual event with New York Consortium for Space Technology. That is going to be a live interview with them at 3 p.m. Eastern. And then we have our big in-person space networking event at the Luxembourg House at 5:30. That's in the city. I think many of you are coming to that. We're very excited for that event. And we have a bunch of other events. Following that, we have another virtual event, a space policy briefing from Pat on Wednesday at 3:15 Eastern. On Thursday, we have 2 interviews, 2 live virtual interviews, one with Ursa Space at 2, and then one with Rocket Star at 4. Worth mentioning, I'm having a hard time keeping track of everyone that's flying in here, but I know that we have Rocket Star with us. So they're here in this meeting, and they'll be doing an interview on Thursday. So very exciting. There's Mike with the celebration thing. Yeah, this is the team. So we're growing our team. I'll talk more about that on the next slide. But this is where we are right now as far as our board. So there's obviously Pat and I, and then we have Casey and Eli. So we now have a team of 4 at the board level, some like superlatives or whatever to describe us. I'll let Pat introduce himself right now, and then I'll take it back over.
Hello, everybody. I'm Patrick Chase with Evan. I'm the fellow co-founder of Empire Space. Some of you I've met, some of you I'm meeting for the first time, and then I pick up the slide deck later. So I'm just going to turn it right back over to Evan.
Thanks, Pat. Evan Lerner. I should have introduced myself at the beginning. Pat and I are the co-founders here. And then this is the rest of our team at the board level. We all have ties to New York one way or another, which is highlighted through these superlatives. Pat and I are both from New York. We've all studied at schools in New York or have ties here through upbringing, etc. So very strong ties, and I guess very tied to our mission here at Empire Space. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. On the growing team side, so this is, we obviously have like a whole cohort of interns, which I think many of you know about. But as far as our like actual team level beyond the interns, we're really growing. We have 2 advisors here. Mike Spaeth and Bobby Davison. And then we have a growing staff, Quadri, who's with us in this town hall today, and then also Serena and Ayusha. Quadri's our programming manager, and then Serena and Ayusha are research associates with us. So we have a growing team, hoping to be a lot more impactful than we've already been through programming, research and reports, everything. So a lot of excitement there. And then we also have a growing intern program. We have several interns joining us this summer, several interns currently with us. So, we've been working on that for a while. It's going well. If you are interested, or if you know someone interested, you can reach out to us at info@empirespace.org. That's our email if you have any questions about it. All right, so we have a lot of sponsors this year. These are our sponsors for Space Week New York 2024. All their logos are up on the screen. I will speak to each of them. A lot of these are also return sponsors, whether that be for Space Day New York from last year or our in-person event or otherwise. So, we're very grateful for our sponsors and sort of their continued support. We have NASA New York Space Grant Consortium, as well as the New York Consortium for Space Technology. These are two consortia out of Cornell, both of which that Empire Space is a part of. We'll be talking more about those later, but we are really excited to be a part of them. There's a lot of great work happening here, which we'll speak about. We think these are hugely important organizations for New York, and specifically for New York Space. We have the Luxembourg Trade and Investment Office we'll be doing an event with tomorrow in person at the Luxembourg House. We have the New York Space Business Roundtable, who we have participated in the roundtables many times. I think we probably have another one coming up soon. We've been on their series twice so far, and we are proud to work with them very closely. We have AIN Ventures, Academy Investor Network Ventures, as well as Squadra Ventures, two VC firms that are active here in New York and have ties into space and aerospace. Columbia Space Initiative, which is the space group out of Columbia University, Copernic Space, Space Prize, Ursa Space, Cloud Metal Specialties, Space Rig, some of these, and Rocket Star. Some of these are companies, space companies. I think all of those are space companies except for Space Prize, which is a nonprofit. So just a lot of great work happening here in New York across all of these sponsors. So we're really proud and excited to sort of show them off in this town hall. Also worth mentioning, several of these, as I talked about earlier, we'll be giving talks throughout the week. That includes the New York Consortium for Space Technology, which is tomorrow, and then Rocket Star on Thursday, as well as Ursa Space on Thursday. So you'll get to, I guess, personally meet some of these groups throughout the week, which is great. To talk about Space Week New York a little bit, this is sort of in theme with Space Day or Space Week New York from last year. We're just sort of leaning into this and trying to leverage it or amplify it even more this year and in the years to come. So we see this as an opportunity to celebrate New York's history, sort of mention or explain as involved as New York has been in space in the past, and then look to the future, lay groundwork for sustained statewide growth across the space industry or the space ecosystem. Across many metrics, which we'll talk about later, New York is currently somewhere around a top 15 space state. One of our big goals here at Empire Space, and one thing that we think Space Week can be leveraged to do, is take New York from this top 15 space state to something like a top 10 or even greater. Really make New York's presence in the space industry much larger. And this includes leveraging and involving Albany, which we plan to do hopefully starting next year. We see a potential for job growth, I should say a tremendous potential for job growth, using the academic and civic programming and sort of leveraging those. Unfortunately, right now the sector is fragmented and underperforming. So by sort of connecting those, we think we'll be able to create a lot of job growth and a lot of growth in general across the space ecosystem. And then last, just taking pride in sort of, what New York Space is, what it has been, and what it can accomplish, celebrating that. So these are our takeaways from Space Day New York 2023, last year. As opposed to this year where we have Space Week, a full week of space programming. Last year, it was one day of space programming. That was from 11 in the morning to 7:30 in the evening. We had over 100 participants across our 5 events. Very diverse involvement, any way that you cut it, as far as like industry professionals, interested citizens, who were participating, sponsors, etc. We had a wide range of programming, sessions on, space companies, space assets and finance. We had sessions for kids, like with the kids workshop, focusing on STEAM. And then we were also preparing for the total solar eclipse, which occurred this year. So there's a lot of groundwork there to I guess make the total solar eclipse celebration what it was. And Space Day New York was a part of that. And then also the key partnerships. So, the same as this year with all of our sponsors and partners, we had many last year. So leveraging those, amplifying the people that do exist here, and then sort of connecting them and building towards the future with them. We put this all up on our YouTube, which is linked here. And I think Quadri will also send a link in the chat for that. We have more than 4 hours of content from Space Day New York. And then lastly, so this is all a recap from last year, but at the end of this week, we'll make a similar one for this year, and then we'll put out these slides to everyone. So you're able to sort of see, what Space Week New York 2024 was all about and what we accomplished. To talk a little bit to New York Space legacy, we really try to speak to this every time we talk about Empire Space and New York Space. New York does have a huge legacy. This is not just something that's happening now or that we're hoping will happen in the future. New York has been very involved in space from the beginning, whether this was with aviation, Lindbergh flying from Long Island, as well as many other aviators flying out of Long Island as an aviation hub, the Apollo landers being built in New York, on Long Island and otherwise, astronauts for the beginning of the space industry being from New York up to the present day, actively right now. And then many other things as well, significant contributions to space research from, our many, many strong institutions, Cornell, Columbia, Brookhaven, University of Buffalo, and many more. NASA facilities in the state, like the one at Columbia, with an associated economic footprint, and then tens of thousands of people employed in this industry across the state. So there really is a large space ecosystem existing here right now, and historically. Some updates from us. Pat will talk more about the census and sort of data, and walk people through this later. But to just highlight this at the top. So for those that aren't aware, this is sort of our big. This is our biggest project to date. This is how we started. When we started Empire Space, we recognized or realized that there was not really a database or any way to see what stakeholders existed in the New York space ecosystem. And so we took the hard work of documenting all of that into a database that we call the census, that is available on our website at empirespace.org/data. This is freely available. We see this as a great tool to promote, engage, collaborate across the New York space ecosystem. We try to make sure that everyone that we interact with is aware of this, knows what stakeholders that they may be interested in, knows which ones exist and are in touch with them. We try to connect people across this census. So we really try to use this tool as much as we can to sort of break down barriers and improve the fragmentation that we've seen. And we encourage you to use this resource, check it out, find out who exists in New York that you might be interested in. Reach out to us if you want introductions or if you have questions about how to navigate it. We're happy to help. But we think this is a really key resource as far as growing the New York space ecosystem. A lot of things are new on the Empire Space side. I touched on this earlier. We've joined two consortia, the New York Consortia for Space Technology and the New York Space Grant Consortium, both of these out of Cornell. These are really exciting groups. We'll talk more about them again later, but we are really proud and excited to be a part of them. There's some great work happening here. Some of it that we're working on directly that we'll talk about. And so these are just huge developments for New York and also for Empire Space. I talked about this earlier. Our team is growing. We're really excited about sort of all the new additions we have, the contributions they're making, and the impact we're going to be able to have with this larger team. There's been a lot of networking activity in New York Space done by Empire Space and otherwise. We've personally participated in or been at a lot of these events, in some cases held these events. So I'll talk about that in a couple slides. But there's just been a lot going on in New York Space recently. And we're sort of excited to showcase that right now, show what's been happening, and then also in the future, try to get people more involved in those events. Space Week New York is obviously happening right now, kicked off with this event. That's new. We're excited about this week and all the programming we have. A bunch of new reports out. Pat will talk about these later. These include the diversity ownership for the companies in the New York space ecosystem, the New Yorkers as a part of the Artemis missions, new New York astronaut profiles, and reports on defense manufacturing for New York Space. The research associates that we spoke about earlier are responsible for many of these reports along with that. So the credit to them, they're doing great work. Lastly, we have a new fancy donation portal on our website. So if you want to donate and support us, we would appreciate it. empirespace.org/donate. This is that list of events that I was talking about. So there has really been a lot going on. This isn't everything that we've been to or that we've been involved in. This is just some of it. This includes, or I should say, this list starts with our event that we had in the fall, that in-person meet and greet in New York City, and ends with Space Week happening right now. All the things that have happened in between that we thought were worth highlighting. There's really so much going on, and I think even comparing this to last year at Space Day, when we did a similar slide on sort of the events that were happening, this list is much more extensive. So it seems like this year there has been a lot of growth as far as activity for New York Space events and networking. So this is great. And we're going to try to bring more publicity and involvement to these events in the future, and awareness in general. So I guess this is a good time to say thank you. Yes.
And Space Week has done a few events too.
Yeah. You're on here. Don't worry. You're down there. May 16th. So yeah, thank you to those that are in attendance, that are responsible for some of these events. We really do appreciate everyone working together to grow the networking in New York space. Ways to get involved. So we have a Get Involved page on our website, empirespace.org/get involved. There's a lot of ways to get involved with Empire Space and with the New York Space ecosystem. We have a Slack channel. If you would like to join, please reach out to us. You can reach us at the email that I mentioned earlier, LinkedIn, however you want to reach us. We would love to add people to our New York Space Slack channel. It's a good way for people to engage with each other in the New York Space ecosystem. On our website, we have a bunch of other resources. We have a calendar of events. We have an Ask Ambassador database, social media database, and more. There's a lot of virtual and in-person events that I just highlighted that are happening. We have some that we've earmarked that are happening in the future. We'd like to, through our social medias like LinkedIn, we try to make sure that people are aware of these. So please attend them if you can. We have a newsletter. We're working on a newsletter, hoping to have that soon. So please sign up, and hopefully we'll be releasing that newsletter to those interested. And then lastly, just word of mouth, tell your family, friends, and community members about what we have going on. All the things I just mentioned, whatever's interesting to you or interesting to them, please spread the word. I am now going to pass this off to my co-founder, Pat, to talk about the census and what's happening in New York.
Hello, everybody. It's good to see you all here tonight. We are very excited to kick off Space Week New York 2024. For some of you who have been to our previous town halls, some of this will be familiar. We like to hammer home some of the same kind of core points. There is a lot of new stuff to discuss. We've been doing a lot more research and kind of digging into some of those secondary questions that we had started to ask last year. So this is kind of the high level analysis. Those of you who have attended our events before will recognize this graphic. It is one of our favorites. So the high points of the New York space ecosystem: space finance powerhouse by any metric, however you want to slice it. New York-based firms are either the first or second largest source of financing for the space industry across the United States. Obviously, most of that stems from Wall Street and New York City. There are space finance companies located throughout the state, though. There's a very active, we refer to it as the civic network. So this is the museums, the planetariums, the observatories, the community groups like rocket clubs and astronomy clubs. New York has a lot of those groups that are active throughout the state. That's how a lot of average citizens will interact with space over the course of their life. A trip to the planetarium with their kid or something like that. Academic and research infrastructure. New York has a lot of really top flight universities. There are more than 65 listed in our census, conducting all sorts of fantastic research, degree programs in space and aerospace related fields. Research infrastructure, NASA facilities at Columbia studying climate, Brookhaven Lab out on Long Island. So we have that kind of the collegiate and research infrastructure that healthy space ecosystems have. And we do have that baseline NASA presence at Columbia, in New York City, which is more than a lot of other states have. But there are areas to focus on. It is not all sunshine and roses. There are lots of barriers to finance. A lot of the financial opportunities that the New York-based firms do have in the space sector is usually directed outside of the state, which is obviously a problem for investing and growing business here. There are gaps in environment, network, and resources. Evan had touched on it before, and it kind of ties into this next one of just the clusters and the fragmentation One of the things we discovered as we first started building out our census is the siloing. Academic groups only within the academic sphere, or different subspecialties only within their subspecialty. One of the most common questions or responses that we got when we would go out and introduce ourselves to new folks is, "Oh my God, I had no idea there was this much going on." Just kind of that fragmentation leads to that lack of awareness of potential partners or available resources. So that's the graphic you see there on your screen. We have the space financing capabilities, we have the space talent, the academic and the civic resources, but they're not properly tied in together to that economic engine that the companies need to recruit talent, to obtain the resources necessary to set up shop here in New York and grow. So to put it bluntly, money and students are leaving the state. We need to close that loop. That is one of the core missions here at Empire Space. So this is a chart. It's actually a chart from last year as well. Evan, if you want to go ahead and phase it forward. So this is a regional breakdown. You see the map over there to the left is how Empire Space breaks our census into regions. This is the exact same breakdown used by Empire State Development. We thought it was helpful and useful. So that is how we analyze the state, and we can analyze the different categories based on how many entries are in our census in those regions. It helps us get a better understanding for strengths and weaknesses in different parts of the ecosystem in different corners of the state. So you'll see here the small subscript are changes from last year's slide to this year's slide. So there have been a lot of additions to the space company slide. This is a mix. Some of these are new companies that have relocated to the state. A lot of these are firms that we became aware of and added into the census. Another takeaway from this chart is that while some regions have a greater concentration of certain types of space ecosystem assets than others, every region is represented. Every region of New York, whether you're in the North Country or Southern Tier, Western New York, Capital Region, Long Island, every region has some component of the New York space ecosystem. So starting off with the academic and civic sector, we conducted a state-by-state analysis. We looked at a lot of the other major state-level space ecosystems in the U.S. Florida, Texas, California, Maryland, Colorado, Virginia, Georgia. Those top 15 that New York is kind of at the tail end of. And one of the almost universal takeaways was that all of these states have a vibrant academic ecosystem that is plugged into the private sector, that is reinforced by an active network of collaboration agents in the civic sector that bring these different partners together, the private sector with academia, with state and local leaders, elected leaders, economic development leaders, in that kind of informal networking, collaborating space. All of those states with successful growing space ecosystems have that network. So here in New York, our census includes 339 unique entries for colleges and universities. This is the total number of degree programs, student clubs, or physical facilities like on-campus planetariums or observatories throughout the state. SUNY and CUNY schools are in this list. They have a lot of great programming, great facilities. Engaging that network will be key to any future growth here in the state. There are dozens of K through 12 schools that are active in various rocketry competitions. Others have planetariums on their campus. This is a thing primarily down in Metro New York City. So those are the seeds of that K through 12 pipeline that feeds into the college pipeline. So there's even those primary and secondary school components of the space ecosystem. The museums, the Rochester Museum and Science Center, most in Syracuse, the Hayden Planetarium down in Manhattan. These are very often ambassadors for how the general public interacts with space-related content in their day-to-day lives, rather than just reading an article on the news. So they are critically important. They are often these facilitators of these informal or unique collaboration and networking spaces. So we try to support them in any way possible. We thank them all for the amazing work that they do. And again, just the numerous rocketry and astronomy groups throughout the state. These tend to be a little bit more prevalent upstate, darker skies and more space for rocketry. But there are also key groups engaging with K through 12 students and things of that nature. So we really wanted to highlight these players. Oftentimes they can get forgotten when you're talking about a space ecosystem. People think about companies, people think about jobs and finance, and that's all critically important. But none of that really reaches its potential if it doesn't have a corresponding academic and civic component to help, fill all those gaps, complete the circle, and really help everything grow. So now shifting to some of those space companies, this is a map or a graph of space companies that are active statewide. The x-axis there is the region. The blue bar there is the number of specialties. So with all of the companies in the Empire Space Census, we break them down into subcategories: aerospace manufacturing, space data analysis, satellite manufacturing. We have a couple dozen different categories. So the blue bar is how many categories of companies are represented in each region, and the red bar is the total locations of those companies. You'll see there Long Island sticks out like a sore thumb in the middle of the graph. This is that legacy aerospace industry. Evan mentioned it during his presentation. Long Island has those very strong ties, not only to the beginning of the space age, but the beginning of the aviation age. As the aviation industry grew into the aerospace industry, a lot of that was centered on Long Island. That's the industry that in the 60s built the Apollo lunar landers. And a lot of those major players, Grumman, et cetera, had secondary satellite aerospace manufacturing firms that sprang up around them. And a lot of them are still in operation out on Long Island. So that's what that line is. You'll also see healthy clusters: New York City, Western New York, Finger Lakes. But again, every region has some representation here on this graph. So some highlights from the private sector. We break down the private companies into a couple of different broader categories. There are 326 total entries. So these are unique sites. A lot of major companies, Lockheed, L3Harris, for example, have multiple sites throughout the state. So it's not 326 companies, it's 326 sites. We felt like it was important to clarify that. These companies have a total tracked employment of roughly 64,000. That number is more nuanced than we would like, but that's about the range that we think space and aerospace employment is in the state. The top 5 categories: aerospace manufacturing is huge. It's about half of the total. Aerospace development and support is just more of that kind of aerospace manufacturing ecosystem. Strong clusters: telecommunications and electronics. There's a lot of firms with Space Force or other kind of military connections to their aerospace work, and then space data firms like Ursa Space that we'll be highlighting later this week. So again, to highlight that regional breakdown, the top 4 regions where the greatest clustering occurs: Long Island and New York City, and then the Western New York and Finger Lakes. So kind of two larger clusters on opposite ends of the state there. So this is just kind of a pie chart representation of what I was just talking about. You can see aerospace manufacturing there on the left is about half of the total sites, but you can see the range of other subcategories that are represented here by companies doing work: space education, optics, journalism and media, tourism, launch and rocketry. So there's a lot of different types of companies doing work in the space ecosystem here, even if the vast majority of it at this moment is those legacy aerospace manufacturing firms. So to turn now for a quick snapshot at the another kind of forgotten component of New York's story in space is the astronauts, is the New Yorkers who have ventured off to the final frontier, almost always through the auspices of NASA. Whether they were born here, they moved here as a kid, or they went to school here, they all have ties to New York, and they have often referenced those ties as they've gone on to their professional careers. So a total of 30 New Yorkers have been to space. They have spent a collective 3 years, 11 months, 25 days, and 38 minutes away from Earth. Figuring out that number was actually a little tricky. That number is as of 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tonight. That number is currently increasing as Jeanette Epps, a native of Syracuse, is currently aboard the International Space Station as an engineer for Expedition 7071. So that clock is continuing to tick. There are other New Yorkers who may be taking their trips at some point in the near future. And then one of our interns, Serena, has done a lot of fantastic work kind of documenting their stories. So we encourage you to check out the report section of our website to read more in-depth stories. Some of the major historic firsts of these New Yorkers who have gone into space. The first mother in space, Anna Lee Fisher, pictured there at right from Queens. The first private citizen in space, Dennis Tito from New York City. First female shuttle commander, Eileen Collins from Elmira. The first live tweet from space was sent by a New Yorker, Nicole Scott from Albany. And then the first pilot of a crewed private spacecraft, it's a SpaceX vehicle, was Doug Hurley, who was from Endicott, which is outside of Binghamton. So New Yorkers have been making the trip to space since the very beginning of the space age, and they have been achieving, some of these historic firsts along the way. So we think this should be something that New Yorkers should be more aware of and should take more pride in as this list continues to grow with time.
Patrick, I want to jump in here because you have two New Yorkers, myself and my wife, were responsible for the first item ever baked in space, cookies that were just 2 weeks ago installed in the Smithsonian. So I wanted just to mention that.
Very cool. Thank you very much, Ian.
Yes.
Pat, you're muted.
Sorry. All right. Now I was on mute. Now I'm back. So now to discuss NASA and specifically their Artemis footprint in New York. NASA conducts a lot of their climate and atmospheric research at the Goddard Institute for Space Studies, located at Columbia University in New York City. NASA economic impacts totaled over $500 million in 2021 and directly supported or indirectly supported 2,300 jobs, which is both of those figures are 15th nationally. There are 82 NASA affiliated companies in some capacity who employ more than 20,000 New Yorkers across the state. New York firms have long played a role in crewed space exploration. Bell Aerospace in Niagara Falls was instrumental in a lot of the success of Gemini and Apollo, in addition to the lunar landers that were built by Grumman out on Long Island. There are currently 64 Artemis affiliated companies. This is NASA's plan to return astronauts to the moon. Those 64 companies exist in 9 out of the 10 regions across the state and employ 18,000 New Yorkers. So New York is an active part of NASA's return to the moon. I think this is also another underappreciated dynamic of New York's current space ecosystem. So there really is a large, a historic participation, a current participation of New York in some of NASA's most significant achievements, some of their greatest programs. And we think this should be something that New Yorkers should be aware of. I know that this was not in my textbooks when I was a student here. I don't think it was in the textbooks of most of the folks here when they were students. And we think that should probably change at some point. Here is a map of those companies in New York. So these are all of the NASA affiliated companies. The blue dots are the small companies, less than 100. The green dots are 100 to just shy of 500. And the purple dots are the large companies. You can see clustering in New York City, Long Island, and the Mid-Hudson. But again, lots of presence upstate, particularly along that Thruway Erie Canal corridor. So this is one of the reports that our research associates helped us pull together. It had a lot of great reception. We encourage you to find this on our website, read it in full. We plan on doing follow-ups in the future. But we wanted to look at diversity at the ownership level of the private sector companies in the New York space ecosystem. So they went through, they pulled the list and identified who fit into one of the three categories, whether it was veteran, minority, or a woman-owned business. 52 of the 281 companies that they analyzed at that point in time fit into at least one of those three. That is 18.5% of the total. Breaking down more specifically, 32 or 11% were a woman-owned firm, 17 or 6% were veteran-owned, 5 or 2% were minority-owned. The veteran ownership rate is roughly on par with the percentage of New Yorkers who are veterans. The other two metrics, minority and woman ownership levels at firms, are far below their representation in the overall population in New York. A lot of this ownership tends to be clustered in the aerospace cluster on Long Island. You can see them. You can see this data kind of represented visually. So the firms are broken out there by region. So it's not all on Long Island. It's predominantly on Long Island, but there is diverse ownership throughout the state. And then the smaller graph there, the far left column is aerospace manufacturing. It kind of just demonstrates the significant dominance of aerospace manufacturing in terms of the types of firms owned by a veteran, minority, or a woman in the New York space ecosystem. So this is something we were interested to see what the results were when we conducted this analysis. Obviously, there's a lot of work to be done in better understanding the dynamics going on here. How do we enhance pipelines for people to advance into leadership positions at these firms? So stay tuned for more research on this topic this year and in the years ahead. So again, I know we've been harping on Long Island, but we think it is an important takeaway from this story. The aviation and aerospace industry on Long Island was really critical in the race to the moon. The 6 Grumman lunar landers left behind a base module when the astronauts blasted back off the lunar surface, and somewhere buried inside of all 6 of those is a little plaque that says "Made in New York." I think that's very cool. I think a lot of us think that's insanely cool. I think it's also a shame that the vast majority of New Yorkers have no idea that that's true. So there are great institutions. Again, we're going to mention some of the civic institutions and the great work that they do. The Cradle of Aviation Museum on Long Island does a lot of great work highlighting this history. So we encourage you to check them out if you're ever out there. But also just to know this story, to tell this story. You know, if you ever want a fun party fact, or if you come across someone who it turns out they're interested in space, this is one of those things to start that conversation, to kind of change the nature of the story about New York's involvement in the space age. So just to kind of recap, high level again, the New York space ecosystem is statewide. It exists in every corner of the state. This is not something that's just, you know, New York City or Long Island. It is really in every large town, small towns, all over the place. New York's contributions to space, to NASA, to the space ecosystem as a whole are much larger than many realize. We think this is the story that needs to be told more. And I hope that we've illuminated here today that New York's space ecosystem has a strong foundation. There are lots of really great components, great firms doing good work, fantastic universities, an active civic network. The issue here in New York is properly mixing that all together. It's not like we're starting from scratch. So moving from the top 15 to the top 10 is not just a dream. It's something we do believe is achievable based on, you know, our years of research, of networking, of understanding the New York space ecosystem, who's doing what here, and what could be done in the future. So everyone has a role to play in this new chapter, whether you're an average citizen, whether you're a legislative staffer, whether you work at one of these companies, whether you're a professor at one of these universities, whether you're a student. everyone has a role to play in what New York space ecosystem looks like over the next 5, 10, 15 years. So our vision, some of the specific things that we hope become part of the conversation moving forward, some type of incubator, accelerator, some type of concentrated facility for new companies, startup companies, small firms to grow and anchor themselves here in New York. We need greater supports and resources for existing firms. There's a lot of firms who are under pressure to relocate operations to different states. So we need to make sure that we have an understanding of what existing firms need to not only maintain their operations here in New York, but to grow them. We need that K through college space and aerospace pipeline focused on the needs of New York space companies that is responsive to gaps in talent and skills that the academic sector can then fill. You have to be having a fluid conversation back and forth, or those gaps are going to remain unaddressed. We need to deepen the connections between space finance and New York City and statewide industry here in New York. We've had some events where that's kind of happened. We need to find more numerous avenues for those conversations to happen, and probably more structured ways for those conversations to happen. But finding ways to get more of the financial assets that flow through New York to flow to New York-based space companies. We have the active civic sector that fosters that connectivity and awareness. We always want to lean into whatever they're doing, support their programming wherever possible, identify new partners, new connections, innovative and unique ways that they can reach out to students, educators, private companies, everyone in between. And finally, but not least importantly, we need involved and aware partners in state and local governments. This is elected officials and their offices. This is economic development agencies at the town, city, county, and state level. Going back to that state-by-state analysis that we did, every other state in the top 15, Maryland, Virginia, it doesn't matter which one, all of them have involved state legislators. It is a bipartisan or nonpartisan effort. They understand the value of a growing, well-connected space ecosystem to all sorts of different components of the health of their state's future. They want the jobs, they want the academic opportunities, they want the benefits to their communities. And a lot of these other states have a more robust understanding of that from state and local legislative and economic development leaders. That is something that is sorely missing in New York. It's not non-existent, but a comprehensive vision is something that we really need to focus on here. So with that, that ends my little tour of the New York space ecosystem, highlighting some of the main points from our census. Again, if you have questions, info@empirespace.org. And now I'm going to turn it over to our new programming manager, Quadri Bello, to talk about Space Week 2025.
Hi, everyone. I'm Quadri. I am the new program manager for Empire Space. If you move forward, Evan, I just want to talk to you guys about what we have in our minds and thinking of for Space Week 2025. Yes, we're thinking that far ahead already. So we are looking to you guys to be a part of working groups to help make this a better Space Week than this year. Not to say that this year isn't going great. It's going great already. So what we have in mind, you've heard Evan and Patrick mention, that advocacy in Albany, getting the buy-in from legislature to kind of be behind the space ecosystem of New York State, and that is something that we are thinking of as a priority for 2025. We're also looking at more in-person events to allow people to network, as well as virtual events to allow folks like us to be aware of what's going on in the ecosystem of New York, who and what is contributed to space in New York. We are looking at more diverse events. I've always been a strong believer of space for all, which means you don't have to be an engineer a scientist or an astronaut to be contributing to space. And we're looking at multiple avenues like art contacts, workshops to make sure that that is the case, and anyone who is interested in space can contribute however they can. And then we're trying to, grow the list of people who are aware of space in New York, giving them the census data that we have, and then, seeing if we can pull theirs as well. And, the goal here is to create a well-rounded space week where everyone is aware of what's going on, everyone can network, and everyone, if possible, can advocate for space in New York. So if that sounds good to you, let me know. There is a link in there, and I'll throw another link up to fill out your interest forms for Space Week 2025. All right, I think that's it for me, and I'll throw it back to Evan, I want to say.
Yeah, thank you,
All right.
Quadri. So we're pretty much through the presentation. I have a few more slides here. I will thank you all in advance for bearing with us to this point. Hopefully it's been informative and sort of grounding as far as understanding what's going on here in the New York space ecosystem. I just have a few slides on sort of planning ahead, taking what we've said and sort of creating action out of it, and then we'll open it up to that Q&A discussion portion. So as far as what's next, understanding this information and doing something with it, there's, I think, a lot of avenues here. Hopefully with tools like the census and what we've talked about today, we're able to find new partners and make new connections, bring people together, create more connectivity in this ecosystem, as well as find new ways to amplify and promote those that exist here, sort of bring more awareness to the stakeholders and everything that's happening in New York. We've touched on this many times today, but sort of thinking and acting systematically in a statewide sense, as opposed to how it's been historically fragmented and sort of disconnected. We think that this approach is going to be really key to growing and building the New York space ecosystem. And then lastly, as far as sort of taking what we've spoken about today, moving to Space Week 2025, making this more of a proper advocacy day and more of a significant media event. Still doing everything that we do for Space Day and Space Week, bringing stakeholders together, spreading awareness, but doing it on a much larger scale where we're, leveraging advocacy and media to a greater sense. We think that would be really impactful, and that's something that we are striving for with Space Week next year. Some upcoming events to highlight in just a couple weeks. So, obviously this week is Space Week. So we have a lot of events happening this week that we are hosting or partnering with people on. In a couple weeks, there's going to be New York Tech Week. There are a few events happening in New York City mainly that are hard tech focused, but have some overlap with space. So if you're interested, there's definitely some events and programming and networking happening during that week that may be relevant. Then there's the New York Consortium for Space Technology, which we've mentioned a few times. They have their symposium in June, on June 14th. I think Quadri will send a link to that in the chat. We're a part of this consortium. We're very excited about what they're doing and what we're doing with them. Talk about that, I think, on the next slide. We'll be presenting at the symposium some of the work that we've done with them to that point. We also think the symposium will be a great place to network and sort of meet those that exist in the broader New York space ecosystem, not just those in the city, but those across New York State. So we think this will be a great event for New York space. We're planning an in-person event in the fall, more to come on that. And then we're also planning a New York Space Career Fair, more to come on that one as well. Something to bring together the talent and the students across our many strong institutions with the companies that exist here to try to keep all of that talent and all of those brains in the state to make our ecosystem stronger. And as we've said many times, Space Week New York 2025, we're very excited about this. We're going to be doing a lot of work for that, and we're really looking forward to this event next year already. One thing to highlight, we have a lot of work that we are doing with NYCST, but one thing to highlight is the needs assessment that we're working on with them. We will do a comprehensive statewide needs assessment for the New York space ecosystem. This will focus on two things, or really we'll have a two-pronged approach. First, we identify gaps and needs using this needs assessment. And then we facilitate a targeted support and research allocation effort sort of to attack those gaps and needs with NYCST. So we think that this is going to be really impactful for the New York space ecosystem. This is part of a larger effort to sort of engage the state in economic development. We do this in many different ways, but we think this needs assessment with NYCST is going to be really powerful along these goals. We'll be doing this, in a few steps, but it's also worth mentioning that beyond what we're doing with NYCST, we plan to do additional needs assessments and surveys. So beyond just, NYCST's goals, we plan to do our own for the academic sector, civic sector, and then some subgroups, and then probably targeted in-depth surveys for certain areas to really understand better what the New York space ecosystem needs, and then try to use our tools and the stakeholders that we have identified to fill those gaps and target those needs. So I guess, beyond what we're doing with NYCST, look ahead in the years to come for a lot more assessment and understanding and support for the state through these kinds of mechanisms. So that is pretty much everything that we wanted to say. Just some parting words, and then we'll open it up. Please stay in touch. We have Slack. If you want to join our Slack, reach out. We have LinkedIn, email. We've talked about our email many times, info@empirespace.org. You can find us on LinkedIn, Empire Space. Start to think about next year already, if you can, join the Space Week working group. And then, continue the hard work, spreading the word, telling people about New York space, the resources that exist, the people that are here, bringing awareness and connecting people, doing the good work. So that's really it. Now is the time for people to ask questions, talk. We also have that town hall discussion forum, which I think one of us will probably check to see if anyone's put anything in there. We can raise anything from that.
Speak of the devil, Evan. I just did that, and we have a couple of questions in there. So if you are listening, thank you for staying with us. We hope that was informative. Either hit the raise your hand button or just put a brief note in the chat if you have a question, and we'll get to you. I do have two here. I believe they both came from Dan Schneiderman at the Rochester Museum and Science Center. He was their Eclipse guru for the last 3 to 4 years. He did everything Eclipse oriented down, or I guess for most of you it would be up here in the Finger Lakes region and Rochester. So we absolutely loved working with him in a number of different events. He was here for Space Day 2023. So he had a couple of questions. One was about the timing of why Space Week is where it is in May. Our internal logic is as to the date. May 25th is the anniversary of JFK's moon speech. This year is the 63rd anniversary of that speech, kind of committing, America on the path to the moon. And as we've highlighted throughout this presentation, New York had a significant contribution to that effort. So that is why, May 25th, it's a Friday this year. So the week leading up to it is one big week. If you are interested in having a conversation about the timing of Space Week 2025, I would say that nothing is set in stone, especially this far out. So join the working group. Let us know what you think. We are open to additional thoughts and comments on that. He had a second one about using the interest from the Eclipse. I don't know, Dan, are you on the call? I don't know if I saw.
Doesn't look like he's here.
Okay, I wasn't sure if he was here. So he had asked how we're planning to leverage the increased interest and networking that came about from the Eclipse this year moving forward. And that is something that we actually have given thought to. A lot of these regions, especially upstate regions that were in the path of totality, Buffalo, Rochester, Watertown, Syracuse, saw bumps in tourism. They had a lot of great networking between private sector companies, academic groups, and the civic sector groups, kind of a microcosm of exactly what we hope to build permanently on the regional level, within the statewide space ecosystem. So there's definitely a lot of work to be done. Speaking with the groups who organized events, what was successful, what wasn't successful, who were your partners, make sure we understand the scope of who was actually involved. follow-up programming. Obviously, there's not another Eclipse coming for us to program around, which obviously, isn't great, especially as a Rochesterian. I didn't get to see what I think other people in the state got to see because it was cloudy here. But yeah, there's a lot of that regional and local networking that we think is just a great example of how local and regional, space ecosystem should be organizing and operating. So we definitely plan on following up with some of those groups. I think the RMSC actually just joined the NASA New York Space Command Consortium. So we will probably pick their brain about that there. But yeah, so those were a couple of questions we had from the forum about the timing and about the Eclipse next year. So I guess we can open it up to the floor. Are there any questions from anyone in the audience? You can write something in the chat. You can hit the raise your hand button and just let us know what you're thinking. Sure, go ahead. I think that was Ivan.
Yeah, I just wanted to say what you guys are doing is so great. I'm very new to the Empire Space Week, and just hearing you go through all of the different elements and all the things you guys are doing, I just think it's absolutely wonderful and astounding. And I'm loving your organization every time you guys talk about it. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. We're glad to be having such an impact. It's I've been working now for 3+ years. We started with that super basic question of who's doing what in space in New York, and it definitely grew into a lot more than I think Evan and I had anticipated when we had that first Zoom call 3.5 years ago. But I think everything that we believed then has been proven now. There is a lot of potential for growth here in the New York space ecosystem. There are companies who want to do work here. There are companies who want to grow here. There are academic institutions who have valuable programming. There are civic groups who are ready to tie it all together. It's not a question of resources or foundation or history or anything like that. The New York space ecosystem has all of that. It's a question of cohesion and vision and pulling it all together. And so that's why we do what we do. And thank you very much for joining us and supporting us. We're very, very glad to welcome new faces. And then I think we have another hand, Mikhail.
Yes, hi.
Hi.
Also pretty new to the whole programming set that you guys are doing, so thank you for doing it. One of the things you hinted at earlier is that, for lack of a better term, there's a bit of a brain drain around people who do get trained in the state and then end up looking for opportunities elsewhere. So in terms of the way the industry is set up in New York State, what does the state really do to try to get people to stick? What's missing in this state that pulls them into other states?
So I mean the brain drain is not unique to this sector. I'm from upstate New York, born and raised. The brain drain at both the high school and the collegiate level has been around for a long time. A lot of people leave New York for various reasons, costs. They don't like clouds or snow, which is a problem, especially here if you live upstate. But specifically to the space and aerospace sector, we've heard this from academic partners, it's just a lack of jobs. People look for work in the space and aerospace sector here and can't find it. Oftentimes because the loudest kind of or the deepest vortices of pulling action are obviously the big three. Texas, Florida, and California is where a lot of the momentum and job growth is. And so a lot of programs have kind of geared themselves or have fallen into a pattern where they just kind of orient outward to the markets that they're currently serving. So the state does have some programs. I know I think it's for SUNY. I believe it's just for SUNY. I don't know if it's applicable for CUNY as well. For some types of loans and financial assistance, you can get a much better deal if you agree to stay in the state after you graduate. So I know there are some programs like that tied specifically to the SUNY schools, which are state-run schools. One of the things that Empire Space specifically will be doing, this is something we've thought about from the beginning, but it really is a question of capacity and bandwidth, and then an understanding of the players. To what Evan mentioned, would be something like a job board, finding ways to more directly connect, the college programs that are graduating students with the companies that are hiring in the state, to foster all of those, connections that we can. But then it also ties into what Evan mentioned about the needs assessment in terms of companies who are trying to hire here. Is it talent? Is it a degree mismatch? They don't have, a specialization that they need. Is it something that does not get talked about often enough, which is a lot of the vocational or 2-year or more technical skill sets, the trades that can be absolutely critical for aerospace manufacturers, but have been very often deprioritized over the years as everyone shifted to more 4-year institutions. So there are some existing state measures. More work needs to be done, specifically with some of the with kind of focusing them in on the challenges within the space industry itself. And then we will try to do some of that programming, the direct connections with the job board, and then the needs assessment to kind of better understand the dynamic. Because then when you have an analysis of companies saying that we struggle hiring with X, Y, and Z, we can then go back to academia and saying the companies in your neighborhood are having trouble hiring for X, Y, and Z. How can you do that? We can go to state legislators or state economic development leaders and saying, private companies in New York are struggling with X, Y, and Z. What can we do about that? So sorry if that question was a little long-winded. I tried to be as comprehensive as possible, and anyone who's heard me talk before knows that that's just kind of a risk that happens. Go ahead, Evan.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I guess, double tap on a few things that Pat said. I agree with everything, but I think it's really mainly a two-pronged problem. One of those, we've been leaning into solving both sides of it, but I think one of them is easier, and we've been going after a bit more, at least in the beginning. So I think it's one, a question of visibility. I think it's sort of a perception, right? Where the students that are graduating perceive that there are not job opportunities in New York, whether that is true or not. And I think the first thing is that there are actually many job opportunities, which Pat touched on, and those are just not really seen. They don't have the kind of visibility that's needed for the talent in the state to really see those and go towards those more than they go towards the high visibility jobs in other states like California. So I think that's really the problem we've been going after first and foremost, is just trying to bring visibility to these companies and these opportunities in the state so that people know what's here and don't just immediately without even seeing the opportunities that exist. The other thing is, yes, it is true that we don't have as many opportunities as a California. And so bringing more companies here and creating more opportunities at those companies is another solution to this problem. It's a bit harder, and we have many other mechanisms that we're pursuing in that goal, and we've talked about some of those. But that's much harder work, and it's going to take longer. But I think immediately we can definitely come in and try to bring visibility to what does exist.
And then I think this is a triple tap now. If I'm gonna go back on what Evan said, one of the things that we do with the NASA New York Space Grant Consortium that they do that we think is helpful in this area is internships. They try to foster internships every year between students at member organizations with various companies throughout the state. We have helped them. We've connected them to new members from our census that they were not aware of before, and we're able to help them place some students there. So internships is another key way that we would hope to expand those opportunities in the future, finding more ways to link, college programs to private sector companies while they're still students. That could also go away to helping with retention. So triple tap over. Any other questions?
Yeah, good question. Thank you.
Yeah, that was a really good question. Let me check the form.
Well, while we're waiting for another question, I'll take a slight tangent here and just sort of lean into, I think, what Pat opened with, and then we'll pass it over to Jim. What Pat opened with, so the connecting the talent and the students of the organizations that exist here is one main thing, and then the other one is connecting the financing and the funding sources to the companies that exist here or to companies that want to come here. And so those are really the two things we're trying to do. We see that there is a lot that exists here and it's just disconnected. So we've talked a lot just now about connecting the students, but another thing that we're doing is trying to connect the money that exists here to the companies that either are here or want to be here. All right, over to Jim.
Yeah, sorry, new here also. I actually came on the request or comment from Dan Schneiderman. I work with Dan. I'm the director of the RMSC Strassenberg Planetarium. I think this is great. Love seeing all this stuff. I'm really curious if you had something in mind and how you would see relationships between museums and New York benefiting and working with the space grant. Like if someone had a picture, a grand scheme in mind.
Evan, you want me to take that one? So, were you referring specifically to the NASA New York Space Grant, Jim, or just grants more broadly?
No, grants more broadly, but also just the Empire Space Week and how we can use this to, use museums to bolster the Space Week moving forward, and everything in New York that is space related. If there was some grand idea in mind that you guys had, like, oh, we would love for museums to be able to do this or that or what have you.
So, also, it's very nice to meet you, by the way. I love the RMSC Planetarium, and I look forward to networking with you after this meeting. But yeah, we mentioned before that it's often underappreciated the role that museums, planetariums, and civic groups play in healthy state-level space ecosystems. When you look at other states, Colorado, even smaller states, Oklahoma, Maryland, and stuff like that, the civic groups, the museums are very often the connectors. They're ones who they can partner with academia. They can partner with K through 12 schools. They can partner with private industry. They have connection to local leaders. And they are oftentimes the only players in the space ecosystem who have those fluid connections with all the different players. So when they are active, when they are well connected, when they are visible, and they draw in all of those other partners, that's where connectivity and innovation begins to happen. And I don't know if you were on the call when I discussed this, Jim, but Empire Space had a table at the Eclipse Festival up in Rochester. We were there for all 3 days, and it struck me how much that type of event was exactly what we want to see on kind of a permanent basis within these regional space ecosystems. You have community rocketry groups chatting with folks from L3 Harris. You have K through 12 students who are touring and who are learning things and who are getting interested. You have high school students who are talking about what they want to do with their career and realizing that there are opportunities here in New York. You have community leaders who are coming through and realizing that all of these space-related stakeholders exist in their community. So there's that public awareness dynamic that happens. Very often a lot of the museums and planetariums, they're the Swiss Army knife. They can do a whole lot of everything that is very useful. So in addition to the things that they do all the time, hosting students that they do in their day-to-day, if you were looking for a specific kind of vision, it would be to maybe play that kind of leadership role. Have an annual space event and just make sure to invite the academic and private sector partners that you partnered with during the Eclipse. All the museums across the state have these huge Rolodexes now from their Eclipse programming. Find another space-related event to program around, every year moving forward. Keep that list active. Keep that list engaged with space related content. So that would be my question, Evan.
Yeah, no, I agree with a lot of what Pat said. I think there are two like actionable things that come to mind for me. One of them is, I think, exactly what Pat said, which is just bringing publicity within your networks to these kinds of events and to other events that apply. So you have, as Pat said, these huge Rolodexes now of the New York Space stakeholders. So just bringing awareness to these events for those people would be huge. And I think the other thing that's very actionable is, at least for Space Week, and I think for other things as well, we would like to have more in-person events. And I think these kinds of venues are fantastic places for these kinds of events. So, in the future, as we develop more of an in-person presence for Space Week, doing programming and events at museums or those kinds of venues, and then, opening up those events at those venues to your audiences and to your networks would be a really impactful way to bring more of an audience and more awareness and more engagement to these kinds of to Space Week and to similar kinds of things. So.
Thank you for the question, Jim. That was an absolutely fantastic question. I will always take a chance to highlight museums and planetariums. I don't think they get nearly enough love. I'm checking the form again. I don't see any new questions. Do we have any other hands from anyone else in the audience? Again, if you think of something else, if you're like me and you think of your best question like 30 seconds after the meeting ends, don't forget info@empirespace.org. Mine's Patrick at empirespace.org. Evans is Evan at empirespace.org. You can always reach out to us with questions, opportunities, thoughts, comments. Hey, we're doing this. Can you help programming? Hey, add this to your calendar. Hey, we want to participate in this, XYZ. We are an open book. We always love hearing from people. Let us know what you're thinking. Let us know what you're working on. We're always happy to hear from folks in the community.
I had one more thing I meant to say for James' question. On the topic of like grants and awards and those kinds of things that can be used in this way, they definitely can be used, and we can work with you, and happy to talk with you more about this later on using grants or applying for grants to fund these kinds of events that bring like students into New York Space or engage students in that kind of way. So there is money available to support these things, and then we're happy to help you with that.
Alrighty then. All right, I don't see any other questions in the form. I guess we'll do one last shout for any questions from anyone here in the audience. Evan, I don't know, did you want to hop back to the upcoming event slide just so we can touch on what else is coming up this week before we wrap up?
You mean this one or the space
full one from the very beginning? No, I'm going to make you work for it.
Yeah. No, that one.
No.
Plus.
What was that? Yeah. Sponsors, team events. There we go. All right. So I just wanted to run through yet again the events we have coming up this week. So tomorrow, 3 p.m., we're going to have a live virtual interview with a Q&A at the end with Mason Peck. He's the executive director at the New York Consortium for Space Technology. We're very excited about this one. I had an opportunity to tour their up and coming, soon to be facility on campus at Cornell. It's an incredibly exciting initiative. $5 million from the DoD to reinforce satellite manufacturing here in the state. A lot of new capabilities are going to be coming online that have never existed before in New York. In terms of technological readiness and getting spacecraft ready to fly and operating, and monitoring them from New York. So it's a fascinating program. We hope you can join us for that. Tomorrow night at 5:30, Evan is having an in-person networking mixer thanks to the Luxembourg Trade and Investment Office at the Lux House. That's going to be a very well-attended event. We know a lot of people are very excited about that. RSVP information is on the site. Wednesday at 3:15, I will be holding a space policy briefing. This will focus on some of the more kind of legislative, economic development aspects. How do other states do it? What are we doing here in New York? What should we be doing here in New York? So that's Wednesday at 3:15. And then Thursday, we have 2 different interviews with private companies from the space ecosystem here. At 2 o'clock, we'll be going live for a virtual interview and Q&A with Ursa Space. They're a space data intelligence company headquartered in Ithaca. And then Thursday at 4, we will be doing a similar format with a crew from Rocket Star. They're headquartered in the city. They're doing a lot of really fantastic work, including some really exciting work with fusion engine thrusters that just gets all of my nerd signals going. So I personally am insanely excited to host that one on Thursday. So that's the rest of our week. We hope that you were able to join us for some of the rest of that. Thank you again for your attendance today. Thank you again for your interest and your curiosity in the New York space ecosystem. Thank you for the work that you do, whether you work at a museum, whether you're a professor, whether you're a student, whether you work at a private company. Thank you for the work that you do every day, moving space forward here in New York. Your efforts are not unnoticed, and Empire Space is here to support and cheerlead you all along the way. I don't have any final thoughts. Any final thoughts from Quadri or Evan?
Oh, good here. I'll second the thank yous. Thanks for coming. Thanks for listening to our somewhat lengthy presentation and for engaging in discussion at the end with us. We appreciate your interest. And looking forward to celebrating the rest of Space Week 2024 with you and in the many years to come. So thanks.
All right. Thank you all. Everyone have a great evening.